I'll tell you what, man. If there's somebody who doesn't feel that sentiment, I think that it is Bill Belichick. Would you agree with me on that?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I can't think of somebody who hates losing more than Tom Brady or Bill Belichick, and two people that did a lot of winning over the course of their time together. And the Patriots this past weekend fell to 1-5, and that's obviously not a record I've seen out of that team since the year 2000, maybe even before that. But I think it's the way that it's happening, and a lot of people are calling Bill Belichick to question and saying a lot of things that I want to discuss here. And I think the one thing that people are saying that I want to debate with you is that Bill Belichick should be fired. So what do you think about that?
That's a tricky one because if you would have asked this question 5 years ago and said, "Do you think that if at some point in time Bill Belichick is struggling, uh, they end up, they have a couple rough years, open the next season 1-5, could you ever fire Bill Belichick?" I think it would have been a unanimous, like, no way, man. You let this guy go out on his own terms. But that being said, like in the moment, and especially, it's not like they they were competing for a championship last year and then they got um, torn apart. Their roster got picked apart in free agency or something. I mean, and now they're getting off to a rough start. Like that's not what happened. This is been a downward trend. Over the last 3 years or so,
I
and
was going to say, yeah, downward
so
trend for sure.
yeah, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. So I mean, the NFL, man, I it's pretty cutthroat. I don't think that there's any free passes in the National Football League. But and I want to hear your thoughts on it too. But I do want to say this to plant this seed to discuss further. To some extent, I wonder, is Bill Belichick mastermind enough, competitive enough that somehow, some way, this is intentional?
I think that there does come a time where if you are a coach that has any sort of forward thinking, then you need to be thinking about the next season if your goal, because the goal for every team is to win a Super Bowl, right? Like every year, every team, no matter what franchise they are, wants to win the Super Bowl. But after a while, we start to find out who is going to be capable of that and who is not. And if you're one of the teams that is not, you should be thinking about the next year. And for the Patriots, I think there are a couple things that are true. I think the first thing that is true is I think that Bill Belichick and Bill O'Brien know that Mac Jones is not it. Like, I think that they know that. And I have been somebody who said he has played well in spots, but as these games have gone on this season, I think it's very obvious that he has regressed. Like, very much so, to the point that his regression is highlighting even more their lack of skill position players, which is something that I've said about them for years. I think the other issue is that Bill Belichick, the GM, is doing a terrible job over the last few years, where I think when he was the GM, when Brady was there, that was cover for a lot of mistakes that you could make in the free agency market or the trade market, because they had a lot of guys that they brought in. Like they gave up a first-round pick for Mohamed Sanu, and he was on the team for 6 games, and then they jettisoned him. He was gone. Those are assets that I think are a mistake. And when you have a quarterback like Mac Jones, I think that they're even more exacerbated. But I think the coach himself is still a good coach. Like I think Bill Belichick hasn't lost it in the coaching department. I think it's the personnel. But now that we're sitting at 1-5, I said it 2 games ago. I hope the Patriots lose every game from here on out. I'm not rooting for them to lose, but Caleb Williams is on the horizon. And can you imagine how pissed off people would be if the Patriots get the number 1 pick and draft Caleb Williams, who's a guy who, for all intents and purposes, looks like he's going to be the real deal in the NFL? I mean, obviously, the last couple of games, he's had some iffy throws, but that's going to happen for quarterbacks. They're going to learn. They're going to progress. Even the best have bad games, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that it is on purpose now, seeing how bad it is, because they can't recover from 1-5.
No, they can't recover from 1-5. And I'm going to take this a step further. And I heard this elsewhere, and I'm like, interesting, unlikely, but interesting. It's a fun talking point. Bill Belichick, I guess, is on record. Well, he's from the Nashville area. He's mentioned many times him and his wife really like the Nashville area. Apparently, they own a home there. so on and so forth. And like I think the reference it was made is, what if there was a coach's trade between Mike Vrabel and Bill Belichick at some point in time? Or let's say that the season ends and, because the Titans aren't having a very good year, Mike Vrabel might be on the hot seat. And is he basically running the Patriots organization into the ground with the foresight of like, I'm going to have to compete against enough other people as it is. I'm going to make sure this place isn't one of them that's going to be a concern for a while. He strikes me as the type of person that would do that would play the long game in that way. But a lot would have to happen. He'd obviously have to have the desire to do that in order for it to happen. But yeah, this is going to be a really great draft for quarterbacks, at least on the surface. When you look at some of the talent, Michael Penix Jr., Caleb Williams, Bo Nix,
Drake May.
Yep, that was the one I was going to struggle with for a second. Yeah, so there's some very good there's a lot of so that's like the top tier, right? Those are your A quarterbacks. There's a lot of like B quarterbacks too that are pretty solid. So it it'll be interesting to see kind of how that unfolds. But it's very bizarre to see this. Do you think that this solidifies that Tom Brady was the straw that stirred the drink during the dynasty?
The players play. So at the end of the day, the players are the ones that win these championships. But I think that multiple things can be true. I think that they don't have the success without Tom Brady, but I also think that if Tom Brady goes anywhere else, it's not a guarantee that he turns into Tom Brady, because I think even though everybody whiffed on him in the draft, the fact that he went to New England and they were able to have the pieces around him. Remember, they had Charlie Weiss was there as their offensive coordinator, former Notre Dame coach, I believe, right? And he was a great coordinator and did great things for the development of Tom Brady in those first few years. I mean, you saw the development happen over time. And then at some point, Tom became Tom and they didn't need anything, except when Josh McDaniels comes in and they write up an offensive scheme that plays to his strengths and redefines the NFL with the two tight end look with Aaron Hernandez, whose name we're not supposed to talk about, and Rob Gronkowski. And I think that it doesn't, I think people too often want to paint a picture of it's either one or the other. I don't think that the Patriots have 20 years of success and 6 Super Bowls if both of those things aren't true. I just don't think so, because the coach before was Pete Carroll. Do you think Pete Carroll is able to get everything out of Tom Brady in that same way? I don't know. It's very possible. So I think that they're both true. I don't think that I'm not in the game of saying that it was either one or the other, but I think the players play. So a player should get more credit for the play that happens on the field. But you could look at a ton of games where coaching really, really mattered. Like that Falcons game in the Super Bowl. A lot of that was coaching because Dan Quinn got out-coached and Kyle Shanahan got out-coached on the other side. Does that happen if somebody else is the quarterback? Are they even in that position? I think that it's both, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think you're right. Another thing that popped into my mind about Belichick while you're speaking was sometimes it feels like, coaches, everybody has an ego, and coaches and professional athletes maybe more so than the average person. He feels like he might be smarter than everyone else. I feel like he wants all of your third, fourth, and fifth round draft picks that he can grab up because he thinks he can see something in players that no one else is going to see. It's funny because what it makes me think about, totally different sports, but similar situation. Iowa wrestling had a dynasty for years under Dan Gable through the 80s and 90s. And then, they went through another coach with Jim Zaleski after Gable retired. And then Tom Brands came in after a few years, and he's been there since. But Iowa, they were the only show in the country. Yeah, there were other good teams, but they were just dominating everyone. And then, it's kind of built on the backs of this tough in your face mindset, right? I mean, it got coined, the Iowa style, right? When you say Iowa style to a wrestling person, they know exactly what you're talking about. And, so I think the coaches, as recently as, I don't know, 10 years ago, the coaches were recruiting a very specific type of person that they were looking for. They were trying to find people that thought like them, that approached wrestling like them, and bypassing a lot of top tier talent, blue chip talent, to find what they considered to be the right people. And then they just started getting the break speed off them by Penn State, who had more talent, and talent at the end of the day won, right? And so they started to change their philosophy a little bit. started getting into some of these homes with these blue chip recruits, and things have changed some. But when it makes me think about that same mentality, like Bill Belichick, he thinks he did have success with maybe certain types of players in his mind, so everyone else is sort of caught up, and he hasn't evolved maybe in his approach to personnel. And I don't know if that's part of what's catching up to him, in addition to losing Tom Brady and things like that. I mean, and the guy has cycled through a lot of coaches because everybody gets hired from that staff. And I mean, they eventually return for a couple of years and they get hired elsewhere.
I was gonna say
But
they
I mean,
fail.
it's almost like Alabama, except for they don't have success. At least Nick Saban's assistants seem to have a little bit of success once they leave. But no, just a couple interesting tidbits.
I think that you're right in this element because I think what happened. I think Tom Brady's last year in New England, the way that it ended. Remember, they were 8-0 at one point in that season, and they were the shakiest 8-0 team because you thought they hadn't played anybody yet, and they went 4-4 down the stretch and lost in the first round to Mike Vrabel and the Titans. And I think that year was 2019. It highlighted the fact that the league had already started to change. And Brady was successful in Tampa because they put a super team around him. I mean, he was in his 40s, but they needed a lot of talent around him for him to be able to do what he did. But look at the rest of the league. Look at the teams that are really, really good. They all have a lot of talent. And look at the Dolphins. Look at the Bills. Look at the Chiefs. They all had guys who could spread the field, who could thread the needle, whatever you want to use for that. But like Mahomes is on another level in how he plays quarterback. I think this league is all about talent. I don't think that you can get by on grit alone. Like the Patriots teams of the 2000s got by because they played really good defense and did just enough to win on the offensive side. Playing good defense now, especially against some of these teams, you're still giving up 20 points, 20, 25 points. And the Patriots can't score that because they don't have any talent. So you need talent. You need a guy, especially a quarterback. And I just don't think that Mac Jones is talented enough to be an NFL quarterback. And if that mindset is true that you're talking about, if you're not getting the talent, then it doesn't matter anymore because now the NFL is more like college in that way where you look at these teams and yes, any given Sunday and all that, but most of the time, the more talented team wins, and the Patriots are one of the least talented in the league. So no matter what Belichick does, they're at a deficiency.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about this. If you went up to just like the average person on the street, like not a diehard football fan, but someone that's at least aware, and you said, who is the quarterback of the Buffalo Bills? They would probably know the answer to that question. Josh Allen. Okay. Like a casual fan. What's the name of their head coach of the Buffalo Bills? I bet you they would be like,
Even I have to think about that.
I believe it's Sean McDermott, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So how bad? But my thing is this: if you said, "Who's the head coach of the New England Patriots?" they would say, "Well, Bill Belichick." Who's the quarterback?
Yeah.
That's the difference, right? I mean, and that's just it. That shows you right there that you don't have. Don't get me wrong. There's some quarterbacks in the league that people aren't going to know their names that are good quarterbacks, but for the most part, if the first person you can think about from an organization is the head coach, that's the first person that pops into a casual fan's head and not a player on the roster. I mean, dude, I don't know if I could, outside of Mac Jones, Ezekiel Elliott,
And those aren't even fair. Really.
I don't know if I could name another player on the Patriots roster.
How about Juju Smith-Schuster?
Okay, yeah. But it's just like
it's hard.
It's tough, man. Like because there are not superstars, and you have to have those types of guys to win games.
Thing is they have a lot of talent on defense, and they just lost Christian Gonzalez, who has been an amazing first-round pickup, and then Matt Judon has been awesome too. Both of them are out for the whole season, so the defense is just completely tanked. But you talked about like people knowing his name, and here's what I think is happening. He's very, very close to breaking Don Shula's record, his all-time win record, and I think he's hanging around for that reason. So the theory about him going to Nashville, at his age, he's 71 years old. You talk about being stubborn. Like, does he really want to start over at an organization completely? And is he really going to be handed anything great there? I mean, I know Will Levis is sitting on the bench there, but how much does he really have? Because it's an aging team. That's why Vrabel is technically on the hot seat. I don't think Vrabel's on the hot seat more than I think he's looking for another opportunity. And I think if Michigan beats Ohio State, that opportunity is right there. Mike Vrabel to Ohio State. Dave said it. I can't agree more. It makes perfect sense to me. So Mike Vrabel is either going to be with the Titans or he's going to be at Ohio State, probably, would be my guess. I mean, he could go to New England, I guess, but it just doesn't seem plausible. But a lot of people are saying that Bill Belichick is being selfish for sticking around to try to break Shula's record. But if you're in that game and in that space, don't you want immortality? Isn't that what you play for?
I think, yeah, and Bill Belichick strikes me as that type of person that is very aware of that fact. He's competitive, right? And you don't keep doing this. I mean, I can't imagine that he would keep dragging himself through the mud if there weren't some other motivation.
Yeah, like don't you think Bill Belichick knows if he doesn't have it? Like he doesn't strike me as the type who is not aware when he doesn't have it. Like he seems like one of the most self-aware people on the planet.
Man, see, I feel like a lot of athletes, coaches, a lot of professionals, right? I even think of the one that sticks out in my head that's local here is the radio broadcaster for the Bradley Braves, which has been like the voice of Bradley basketball for my entire life, and then for years prior. And they had a big celebration for him, I don't know, 5 years ago or so. He reached a milestone. And I remember seeing like a clip, and he goes, there's people around me. He goes, I don't want to overstay. There's people around me who will tell me when I start to slip and things like that. I want to make sure I don't do a disservice to the job and all this stuff. But like the dude, I mean, and this is I love the guy. I mean, like I said, he's been like ingrained in my childhood memories and everything associated with Bradley basketball. The dude struggles these days, man. Like, I mean, it's bad, especially knowing how he was like in his prime. He's struggling, and it's like, man, I remember him saying that like when it got rough that he would step away, and it's like I feel like maybe he just can't bring himself to do it. And I think a lot of people say that. They say that like, oh, I want to step away before I have to be like taken out the pasture and put out of my misery, but they never do. Rarely do they do, or do they do it? Like Barry Sanders might be like one of the big ones that pops into mind.
That's a little different.
I mean, Andrew Luck in a way, but that was kind of weird, those circumstances and under which he retired. But
similar to Barry Sanders, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Sure. And I'm not as familiar, full transparency, I'm not as familiar with the Barry Sanders retirement situation. I mean, I think a lot of people say that, and you would want that for yourself until you're in that moment, and then I think people have a hard time walking away.
That means we should walk away, because aren't we supposed to be transparent and say like, well, if we don't have it, and people probably think we don't have it, so we should just leave. But maybe you're right. Maybe he is delusional in that fact. Maybe he is pushing to try to attain something that is just not attainable. But here's the thing. He has to know, like you always said it, the coach knows when he doesn't have it. And I'm talking about his team. He knows that this team doesn't have it. 100% he knows this. So if he's going to stick around to try to get this record, then the only other plausible path forward is to get better damn players so you can win more games, because he's not going to get there winning 4 games a season, because I think he needs like 20 wins. He's not going to make it winning 4 games a season. He's going to need a couple of 10-win seasons in there, and the only way to do that is to get better players. Like maybe we don't know how good Mac Jones is because the players that he has been brought in to deal with suck. And I think that's fair.
I've heard he's not very well liked in the locker room. That there's talk of there have been some situations where other teams have taken like cheap shots, and typically you see like people's team, especially the quarterback, right? Like people coming to the quarterback's defense. Well, I guess there's a couple instances where Mac Jones has gotten cheap shot or whatever, and like nobody comes to stick up for him.
I think he's whiny. I don't think that he embodies the quote unquote Patriot way. Kyle Schwarber just hit a massive home run, 3-0 Phillies. And I think that he doesn't embody what a Belichick team and the players that play there. Like a lot of players that play for Belichick still want to embody that same mentality, the do your job mentality. And Mac Jones honestly has whined a lot when things don't go his way. And I don't know if he's the kind of player that can get through adversity. Think about everything that he has done up until this point. I mean, everything at Alabama, that year that he won the national championship, everything was easy because he's thrown to Devontae Smith and all these other great players on that offense. He didn't really have to
Yeah.
do a whole lot. He's never really had adversity, probably his entire life. Like Mac Jones, didn't he grow up in kind of a wealthy family, a wealthy situation? Like, has his life ever been hard? And now, for the first time in his football life, it's hard. And he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who can get past that adversity. And other players on the team who are playing through injury, who are nicked up, they don't want to see that. They don't want to see a guy whining because he's struggling. Get in the film room, read the playbook, and learn how to throw the ball down the field. Like, that's what they're going to say to him. I think that's really what it is, and I would not be surprised if they do not like him in the locker room. They said the same thing about Carson Wentz, and where is he now?
Yeah, sit on a couch somewhere, right?
Yeah, probably going to be the starters for the Jets at some point in the season if Zach Wilson goes down.
Is he on their roster? Is he on a roster anywhere? I don't think so.
No. That was one of the guys I think you posited they should bring in or think about bringing in, and I was like, absolutely not.
I don't know if I said that. I just was listing off a lot of these quarterbacks that are sitting at home and saying, do you think they bring in one of these former starters that are out of the game?
You wanted to see Carson Wentz back. You know that you did. By the way, Joe Girardi's doing a hell of a job with this Phillies team right now. They are a team of destiny. So, but continuing to talk about the NFL, man, I think we'll watch Bill Belichick's future. I think they're going to win 3-4 games maybe this season, and it wouldn't surprise me if he retired. It also wouldn't surprise me if he said F you and just came back and coached with maybe even a worse team or Caleb Williams, and there you go.